Could you hear us? You should unmute yourself.
Greetings, great to see you.
Oh, great to see you. Finally, we could make it. Sorry for delay. We had some technical issues.
No problem, no problem. It's very good. I can hear you perfectly.
So thanks a lot for joining us today, and it's truly a very important opportunity for us to hear more about, probably briefly about your university, and also related to the topic which we agreed before, the Turkish foreign policy on a global and regional levels. So for the room, I'll briefly introduce Professor Hasan Al-Karisal. He made his BA and PhD degrees in Bilkent University and MA degree at Marquette University. Now he is a well-known scholar on Turkish foreign policy, on Central Asian studies. His articles were published in many prominent journals, peer-reviewed, with a high impact factor. And he, starting from 2017, he joined to Cappadocia University, and now, and from 2018 exactly, he has become a rector of this university. And we are very grateful to you for joining us today and for sharing with us your remarks. And I would like to give a floor to our Vice Rector on Science and Innovation, Professor Ismailova, who would like to share to say a brief opening remarks.
Dear Professor, good day. We are glad to see you. It's a great pleasure and honor for us. Thank you very much for joining us, for giving this opportunity for our scholars, students, and professors to see to hear your lecture. So welcome to the university. We hope you will join us offline someday. So thank you. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you.
If you don't mind, we will record this meeting. If you don't mind, then we can share it on YouTube or some platform.
No problem.
Please.
Maybe for the beginning, I might little bit practice my Uzbek, if you don't mind. Huh?
Very good.
Dear colleagues, hürmetli hemkarlar, kadirli hemkasıplar, sizin aranızda buluş men için katta şereftir. Özbekistan'daki en tanıklı halkara münasebetler alimleri bilen birge buluş benim için şereftir. Bu benim ikinci vatanım Taşkent, Özbekistan. Çünkü benim sevimli hatınım nafakat Taşkentlik. Şuningdek belki sizin üniversitenizin fehirli bitiricisidir. Onda Ekrem Eke yaxşı bilerdi. Məni təklif qılğanınız için teşekkür ve mən sizge müştəşiş imkaniyeti de hem təşrif buyurmakçımın, gelmekçimın. Barşanız gide Kapadokya'ya bizim üniversitemiz ve güzel merkezi Türkiye'ye teşrif buyuruşla teklif kılanan. Aziz dostlar, Türkiye taşkı siyasetini düşünüş için bizim 3 kabiliyetini rivajlandırışımız gerek. Birinci, geografik elbette caylaşu. İkinci, tarihi ölçü. Üçüncü, büyük güç ve güçler muvazanatı siyaseti. Türkiye taşkı siyasetinin son 200 yıllık tarihi, birinciden basımlarga karşı duruş ve büyük güç sıfatı da tirilişini arzu kılış siyasetidir. Elbette sahnede köplep çeklevler mevcut idi. Birinci, Osmanlı İmperyası uzak ve meşakkatli vakitten son kulap düştü. İkinciden, yangi Türkiye devleti de katta güç intilişleri bolmagan, arzu kılınmagan. Eğer hazır ruhsat verseniz ben İngiliz diliyle devam etmek için çünkü benim Özbek dilini biliş derecem yeterliyemez. Thank you for patiently listening my broken Uzbek. it has been quite a long time. Well, thank you to the university and Professor Remark for inviting me. I would like to start with the global perspective. Definitely, as I tried to say in Uzbek, we Turks live back in history. And that's quite similar to the Russian foreign policy and Russian understanding of the world. And I will be trying to touch upon some similar aspects between Turkish and the Russian foreign policies in that respect, an identity crisis, East and West, and where do we belong, what kind of people we are. These are not only philosophical questions, these are also closely connected with the both domestic politics and the international politics of the country. So let's start with the global perspective. Where do we locate Turkey? That and just like any questions, that has got two different parts. Where do Turks themselves locate themselves within the global perspective? And where do others locate Turkey in the global perspective? That is the question. Well, for a very long time, I can say for the last 200 years at least, Turks wanted to locate themselves in the Western family of nations. They changed the names from time to time. Muasır medeniyetler seviyesi, for example, that was Atatürk's quotation. The most developed nations. Atatürk always wanted to include Turkey into the family of the most developed Western nations. But it was not only Atatürk's project, but it was also a project for many Turkish sultans throughout the 19th century. 19th century is a century of modernization, constant reform, while Turkish sultans tried to, recognizing their backwardness, and 19th century is called as the longest and most suffering century of the empire. Professor İlber Ortaylı has got a great book about that, and Lord Kinross has got a very good book in English. It's called The Ottoman Centuries. 19th century was terrible because it started with disintegration. Just following the French Revolution, many, especially Christian subjects of the Ottoman Empire, were subject to nationalism wave in Europe. It was first the Greeks in 1821 rebelled and established their nation state. And throughout the century, Ottoman Balkans and the Ottoman Christian subjects declared their independences one after another, and Ottoman sultans tried to stop this disintegration. And they were quite successful because they postponed the collapse of the Ottoman Empire almost for a century through the reforms in the army, in the bureaucracy, and also they were very able bureaucrats. We were saying a weak country needs very good diplomacy. A strong country can absorb all kinds of mistakes which can be done in foreign policy, but a weak country needs, and empire was weak at throughout the 19th century, and it has raised a generation of very able bureaucrats and diplomats, a very elite corps, and they relied upon the balance of power politics in Europe and among the great powers, especially balancing Russian Empire and the British Empire. Two major. Russian Empire was the greatest continental colonial empire the history has ever seen as a colonial empire, and British Empire was the greatest overseas colonial empire history has ever seen. And the major, well, some people called it as a great game, but Russian Empire was in the continent of Eurasia, expanding throughout the 19th century to the Caucasus, to Central Asia, even to the American continent, but British Empire to the Africa and to the Indian subcontinent and other places. And Ottoman Empire was suffering from backwardness, etc. So I don't want to stay in history for so long, but that had created a post-imperial syndrome among the diplomats of the new Turkish Republic after 1923. All these new Turkish diplomats and politicians were born in the Ottoman Empire, and they were Ottoman soldiers and Ottoman diplomats, and were equipped with the technology of the empire in that respect, and they were very able diplomats as well. But they decided on one thing. The new Turkish Republic was a nation state, and it doesn't have any imperial or great power inspirations. So there was no resurrection motivation among the politicians and the founding fathers of the new Turkish Republic. That is one thing we should always remember, a nation state. But transforming an empire into a nation state is a very complicated thing. Well, if you want to draw parallels or find some analogies from the Russian Empire transforming into the Soviet Union, but the Russian Empire transformed into Soviet Union with minor losses of land. It continued as what we called in the Western literature as the Soviet Empire. It was still multinational, multilingual, even better than the Soviet Russian Empire, because it has granted many rights to the subjects, peoples of the empire as nation states within the Soviet system in that respect. But I don't believe in good analogies, but still, maybe we can compare that period with the post-Soviet times, some Russian politicians suffering from post-imperial syndromes or traumas and remembering the imperial time. So quite similarly, throughout the 20th century, some Turkish politicians remembered the imperial times and wanted a resurrection, but the dominant state's approach to foreign relations was completely against that and considered Turkey as a nation state, as a medium power, as a weak economy which needs industrialization and quick recovery from wars and centuries of backwardness, etc. So that was a major project at the beginning of the 20th century. And until the Second World War, Turkey is called as a autonomous country within the international system. Well, what do we mean by that? It was interwar period and there were no major alliances formed yet. Turkey had developed, especially after 1925, very close relations with the Soviet Union. Even during the Turkish War of Liberation, Soviet Union and Turkey cooperated a lot, especially in terms of arms trade and military cooperation. The first wave of Turkish industrialization came with this Soviet help after 1925, but that was broken in 1936 with the Montreux Convention regulating the Turkish sovereignty over the Turkish Straits. Anyway, so 1923, 1945 kind of relative autonomy, 1945 on until probably end of the Cold War, 1989, we consider the fall of the Berlin Wall as the end of the Cold War. Turkey was in the Western axis security-wise as well, but I should underline for our friends that there is a myth of NATO, Turkey being a loyal ally of NATO. That's kind of an exaggeration because in many respects, Turkish-NATO relations, Turkish-American relations has always been very much problematic throughout the 20th century. Maybe in the question and answer period, we can go into the depths of the problems of Turkish-American relations throughout the 20th century. So considering Turkey as a staunch American ally, NATO member is kind of a semi-misconception in that respect. Of course, locating Turkey in the global perspective relies on three pillars. First, security, security aspirations, which security pact or which kind of a security network Turkey belongs to, and is it static or dynamic? It changes or not. Secondly, economy and industry, which Turkey always attributed utmost importance. That's why actually, especially after the death of Stalin, from the end of 1950s, throughout 1960s, up to mid-1970s, Turkey and Soviet Union cooperated a lot, especially for the Turkish industrialization effort, which lots of, for example, technology transfers, establishments of factories in Turkey realized by the Soviet foreign aid, which was refused, the industrialization projects were refused to be sponsored by the Turkish NATO allies in the West. For example, Marshall Aid at the end of the Second World War foresees to put Turkey into an agricultural nation to feed industrialized Europe. Okay, so we can go back to that as well. Economy and industry is very important. And thirdly, of course, political. Political also philosophical. Where do we locate ourselves? I mean, because modernization, development, all kind of positively attributed conceptions throughout the 200 years are interconnected with the Western axis. West represented industrialized welfare state, a developed model for Turkey. And that's why at one point it was England, later France, and later, I mean, throughout a good part of the 20th century, Germany were the model countries for Turkey to establish its industry and establish its economy in that respect. If we start with security, there's a NATO myth. We talked about that. Turkey, yes, Turkey fought in 1952 at Korean War, and that's how Turkey got into NATO. Turkey applied NATO membership 3 times and refused. And only after sending troops to the Korean War, Turkey was admitted to NATO. But just after that, for example, many crises emerged. 1964, Johnson letter, diplomacy and Turkish politics, and start of the rise of anti-Americanism, simply because American President Johnson said that in case of a Turco-Greek conflict within NATO or within the Eastern Mediterranean Aegean, the United States basically would stay quiet or even give arms to the Greeks. I mean, Turkish bureaucracy and diplomacy read that as the United States and the NATO allies were taking a side on the part of the Greeks. And many other problems following that, including the Cyprus crisis, following arms embargo against Turkey after 1974. I mean, can you imagine a NATO ally is putting an arms embargo on another NATO ally? But that's another thing. And Turkey, that's why one of the reasons in 1968, Turkish Prime Minister Demirel traveled to Soviet Union and launched many important projects. For example, many hardcore Turkish industrial infrastructure were built by the Soviet credits throughout this period. Anyway, within the security thing, if we come to the contemporary politics, there is always a mistrust towards NATO and NATO alliance. Turks always thought that in case of a Soviet-NATO war, throughout the Cold War years, NATO would not protect Turkey. That's why Turkey has spent a lot of money to build a huge military machine, especially in Eastern Turkey, to stop massive Soviet armies or imagined Soviet occupation in that respect. And especially after the Cold War, our region was full of many conflicts, Iraq conflict, right now Syrian conflict, and NATO has never granted Turkey, for example, air coverage, missile defense systems. For example, now it's very famous, it's very popular to talk about S-400 systems Turkey bought from Russian Federation to protect its airspace for long-range purposes. Turkey has been asking the United States to give Patriot missile systems since 1991, the first Gulf War, and Turkey was not given them. I mean, there is a huge process of Senate approvals, etc. Turkey was refused by, unfortunately, refused by the Western allies, especially, for example, to develop its arms industry. That's why for the last 20, 25 years, even 30 years, Turkey has developed its own arms and defense industry in that respect. The threats are were not only coming from Iraq, Syria, southern neighbors, but sometimes there were major potential conflict regions in the Aegean and in the Black Sea regions as well. Another dimension of security is immigration. Turkey is per capita the most immigrant hosting country right now, or over 6.5 million immigrants or refugees. There is still a conception problem as well in Turkey. Most of them are Syrians, but lots of Afghans, Iranians, etc. And of course, one of the major pillars of security is security. security, simply because throughout 1980s and 90s, Turkey has suffered from a separatist terrorist organization in southeastern Turkey, which has taken advantage of the power vacuums in northern Iraq and also in Syria, and launched a deadly terror campaign against Turkey. And Turkey was always very much disappointed not finding Western friends or allied friends to support its war against terror in that respect. Again, trying to locate Turkey globally from an economic perspective, Turkey wants to continue its export-led growth through the export of industrial goods. Agriculture is important, but agriculture is important to feed our own people mostly. There is a small part of Turkish exports of agricultural products, especially to Nordic countries, northern countries. But most of Turkish exports are the goods produced industrially, TV sets, computers, and all others. And tourism is another important asset, which is an important part of Turkish economy. But the thing is that the world economically is subject to change. China becoming the world's #1 economy right now. Turkey has been a member of European Union Customs Union since 1996. That's very interesting. Turkey is not a member of European Union for many reasons, you know probably better than me, but Turkey is a member of European Union Customs Union for so long time. What does it mean? It basically 25 years, a quarter of century. Well, at the beginning, we were very much scared of that, simply because that creates a complex set of questions, and that had limited Turkey's options of export and import. For example, Turkey wants to import some item X from China, but it's subject to European Union quotas and price ceilings, all right? And when Turkey is going to export something, that gives a lot of liability, but also opportunity to Turkish exporters to European Union. That's how actually Turkish exporters throughout the 25 years had developed very good skills for competition against their Far Eastern competitors. For example, Turkish TV sets competed with Korean, Chinese TV sets, and we had a very good share in European Union in that respect. Becoming a full European Union member is something else. Actually, Turkish academia intellectuals were divided into two, either becoming a full member of EU politically or staying as a member of the customs union. Many supported actually staying as a member of customs union simply because becoming a member means the surrender of a good part of the national sovereignty to the Brussels bureaucrats. Another part of the economy is energy politics. For the last 30 years, probably, Turkey has been following a very good energy policy, simply because most of Turkey's foreign currency reserves are spent on importing energy. Turkey doesn't have oil, doesn't have natural gas, very limited reserves. So the #1 partner is Russian Federation right now, but Turkey signed the first natural gas treaty with the Soviet Union back in 1984, and natural gas arrived to Turkey, I think, in 1987-88, so before the Soviet collapse. And Russia is a very reliable partner in that respect, because many crisis we had with Russia, there was never ever any problem with the natural gas and oil trade in that respect. And the third axis is political axis. I'm not going into the details of that, but there's a Western axis, there's an Islamic Middle Eastern axis, and there's a Eurasian axis, which is a bulk of a big continent. In the regional perspective, I should underline the fact that just like any other post-imperial transformation times, there is a mixture of ethnic and religious population in Turkey. Definitely over 80% of Turkey are ethnic Turks or Turkomans, whatever you call it. But we have very strong communities of Circassians, the whole northern Caucasian people. We have a very strong community of Balkan immigrants. Most of them are ethnically Turkish, but there are also Macedonian-speaking Muslims, Bosnian-speaking Muslims, Albanians, Bulgarian-speaking Muslims, etc. So, but they are the Turkish citizens, and they continue their heritage, and they still sustain their relations with their former fatherlands. There is a very strong Crimean Tatar diaspora in Turkey. So the national territorial delimitation of the new nation state, Turkey, in 1924 was a result of a world war and a war of national liberation. Major parts of the huge Turkish-speaking populations were left behind in Iraq, in Syria, in Greece, in Bulgaria, etc. But Turkey never aspired any kind of expanding territories or using them as the fifth columns in the neighboring states, etc. But instead, for example, it was the latest in 1989, about 1 million Bulgarian Turkish Muslims escaping from Bulgaria, Zhivkov regime, arrived to Turkey. Most of them stayed Turkey and still in Turkey, but half of them went back to Bulgaria after the fall of communism. So all this kind of diasporas create sometimes interesting pressures, and both in domestic and foreign policies, and also they are very active in civil society and politics in that state. So we should keep in mind when thinking about regional perspective, whenever you have, for example, we talk about Turkish-Syrian border, we should keep in mind that on the both sides of the border, there are peoples speaking Turkish, Kurdish, Arabic. So borders do not represent exact divisions of peoples, religions, beliefs, etc. So the Middle East perspective is probably the most complicated one. Let's start with Syria because it is the most popular one. Turkish-Syrian border is the longest Turkish land border, about 1,000 kilometers, and it's flat. It means that walking from one side to the other side is easy. It was heavily fortified throughout the Cold War years. There were over, I think, 3 million landmines. They were cleared about 15 years ago, just 5 years before the breakout of the Syrian civil war. And there is a war since 2011. About 5 million Syrians live in Turkey. About half of the population of Syria are relocated in the neighboring countries. North of Syria, there is a huge Turkmen population and represents a very important security kind of a fragile security network on the part of Turkey. So the Turkish army is very active in northern Syria, either establishing its own safety zones in order to keep new immigrants to come to Turkey or stay there, or deliver humanitarian aid to places like in the neighboring regions. But the Syrian civil war is very complicated simply because there is a Western alliance. There is Turkish troops, Western Air Force actually coverage, but the most importantly Russia. The Soviet Union established Tartus naval base, the first naval base in Eastern Mediterranean by the Soviet Union back in 1971. Himeyim Air Base is just next to it, very close to it, and it is 2015. So there is a huge Russian military presence, and maybe the legendary Russia going down to the warm seas as realized through that. And that creates a lot of tension in Eastern Mediterranean. And Iran is very active. Saudi Arabia was very active until very recently. They switched sides right now. But the regime sustained its existence in most of the major centers. And sometimes people read the Syrian civil war as a Sunni Shia axis, or it's from a religious or ethnic perspective. I don't believe so, simply because whenever you look at the government troops or the opposition troops, you see a very colorful range of peoples, beliefs, religions. So it is much more complicated than that, and Turkey has suffered terribly for the last 10 years. And European Union, some of the international bodies promised Turkey to support the refugees, at least on the border areas, but most of the burden is on the shoulders of the Turkish citizens. Secondly, I would like to touch upon Egypt. Egypt is, from my perspective, is the most influential country throughout all Arabic-speaking world. Whenever I traveled any Arabic-speaking world, switching on the TV, you see an Egyptian TV serial or Egyptian artist, Egyptian singer. Egypt is a very fertile place. It has been part of the Ottoman Empire until the end of the 19th century. Very brief period of British colonial rule. But even under the Ottomans, Egypt was always autonomous, and it was the center of, for many centuries, it was the center of arts, academia, and all kind of intellectual production. And it has got a very strong army and assumes the leadership of the Arabic-speaking world, both in Northern Africa and also in the Middle East. So Egyptian aspirations for the leadership of the Islamic and the Arabic world is very strong, and sometimes that clashes with Turkish aspirations when Turkish politicians develop some aspirations about Middle East and helping or sustaining Turkish presence in the Middle East. So Egypt is very ambitious not to let two non-Arabic countries, Iran and Turkey, to the affairs of the Arabic-speaking world in that respect, if we can summarize in that way. Iran is also very important country. That many people read Iran's foreign policy in the region as a policy of religion, supporting or using, facilitating Shiite access. But I do think that Iran is one of the most rational actors in the foreign policy in a regional basis. Definitely uses the Shiite access from Yemen to the Gulf countries, even sometimes agitating the Saudi Eastern Shiite ring, Dhahran, the center of oil production. Iraq is a divided country into three, and Iran is probably the most influential country in the Iraqi politics right now. Even in Syrian civil war, we have seen Iranian strong support to the regime, but not only limited to that. In Africa, in Northern Africa and Central Africa, Iran is very active. Apart from all Iranian influence, definitely in Indian subcontinent, Afghanistan, and as you can imagine in Tajikistan as well. But Iran is a strong player, and despite the fact that many people tend to see Iran on the same axis with Russia, China, and challenging the United States in most of the international platforms, later we see Iranians has got good diplomatic skills to negotiate with the United States in all times. And definitely Iraq is a fragile Arab country in three pieces now. Turkey is very much concerned about the future of Turkomans in Mosul and Kirkuk in northern Iraq. Caucasus, we divide Caucasus into two, Northern Caucasus and Southern Caucasus. The Caucasus, throughout 1990s, Turkey, especially in domestic politics, very much closely followed the developments in Chechen wars, the developments in Dagestan, etc. But from the end of the 90s, 2000s, well, there is still a strong Circassian diaspora. a lively one in Turkey, active in politics, but the Northern Caucasus is a bit out of the contemporary agenda right now. Right now, the major agenda is about Southern Caucasus. In Southern Caucasus, there were two major agenda items. One of them was the continuing Armenian occupation of Nagorno-Karabakh, a part of Azerbaijani territory according to all international treaties, and Azerbaijan was able to liberate a good part of the occupied lands surrounding Karabakh right now in October war last year. So there is a good kind of, from the Turkish foreign policy perspective, the things are in line. The second thing is about sustaining the sovereignty and independence of Georgia, not only because in Turkey there is a good Azerian, Muslim Georgian population, but Georgia, especially in the existence of an Armenia, which doesn't recognize Turkey's territorial integrity, Turkish-Armenian border, and Armenia is also very much in the domestic politics influenced by the what we call as the Karabakh clan, very active political power of Karabakh Armenians. So Georgia was very precious on the side of Turkey. The only link connecting Turkey to Azerbaijan, to Caspian oil and natural gas, all kind of natural gas and oil pipelines pass through Georgia. And also, it's always good to have a buffer between Russia and Turkey in that respect. It's kind of a traditional, I think, Turkish foreign policy reference. Especially even during the Abkhaz and Ossetian wars, although there's Abkhaz and Ossetian populations in Turkey, Turkey tried to support Georgian independence. With one exception, Turkey stops NATO entering into Black Sea. That's very critical, and that puts a lot of pressure on Turkey. Even in the very height of the Georgian war in 2008, Abkhaz and Ossetian war, the latest one, Turkey didn't let US and NATO naval presence go through the Turkish Straits into the Black Sea right away. Stopped them for many days until the conflict come to an end, because Turkey sees Black Sea as a Turco-Russian lake in that respect, if I may say so. A NATO existence in the Black Sea would undermine the Turkish sovereignty over the Turkish Straits and create a set of different problems. Well, I started with Middle East, going into the Caucasus, but probably that would be too long to continue, because we have Black Sea, a complete different topic, Crimea, Tatar diaspora, Ukraine, and it's Turkey is attributing a lot of importance in territorial integrity of Ukraine in that respect. Russia, Turkey, but the thing is that the Black Sea thing is important simply because the new NATO members, Bulgaria, Romania, and prospective potential NATO members, Ukraine and Georgia, are very keen on inviting NATO into the Black Sea, but Turkey has been resisting it probably since 2004, 2003. So because 2003, the United States started to move a lot of troops from German NATO bases to Romania and later on to Bulgaria, thinking that it would be easy to establish naval bases and air bases in these two new NATO members and turn Black Sea into a NATO sea, but that was not possible because of Turkish resistance. It's not always easy to tackle or deal with the US aspirations in that respect. Of course, US has got some assumptions, especially the liberal politicians of the United States at that time. You remember the series of the colored revolutions at the time, but that stayed as an assumption. It's not easy to change the political culture or to turn nations into Western democratic nations in one night through what's it called, revolution, etc. We have seen that, their consequences of them. People suffered, economies suffered, countries lost their territorial integrities. So this transformation, this liberal dream, actually failed. It couldn't pass the exams or the challenges of the 20th century in that respect. Of course, I would like to spare some time for questions and answers, but also, for example, yesterday, the Polish president was visiting Turkey. Poland and Turkey are very old allies from the 18th, 19th centuries. Against the Russian Empire at that time, but right now NATO members. That was a very symbolic visit to Turkey, because Turkey first probably in her history sold some unmanned aerial vehicles, armed ones, to Poland, 24 of them. That's kind of a major thing, because that's one of the sources of discontent, dispute between Turkey and Russia, simply because Turkey sold a similar system to Ukraine as well, and they were active in the last Karabakh war between Azerbaijan and Armenia. So, and in the last days, there are some kind of negative announcements on the part of the Russian Minister of Foreign Affairs about Turkish aspirations in the region. But these are not all, of course, interconnected. However, what I believe personally, history, geography, and politics, interconnected with economics, take countries on a track. And this track cannot be easily changeable. So I wake up this morning and say, hey, let's become close members with India. That's not so easy. So they're sustaining relations, raising cadres who speak languages, understand politics, takes time. And sometimes, for example, one of the major issues between in Turko-Russian relations, I heard from some of my diplomat friends or academician friends, the thing that, for example, Russians do not take us as their equals. So because of the great power syndrome and trauma. So Turkey, for example, Turkey is a satellite country of NATO. Kind of assumptions always stopped relations to evolve and flourish in a natural way in that respect. Anyway, let me stop here, simply because it has been almost 50 minutes right now. So maybe some of the questions and answers, we can go into the details of some of the topics I tried to cover.
Thanks a lot, Professor Karasar. Thanks a lot. Now, can you hear us?
Yes.
Now, my colleague has a short question. My colleague is Dr. Naimov, Otabek Naimov. He is the dean of our postgraduate studies division.
Great to meet you, sir.
Professor Karasar, thank you very much for your insightful lecture. You covered Turkish foreign policy, mainly vis-a-vis to European Union, Russia, and Caucasus. So my question, Middle East, my question regards Turkish Central Asian relations. As part of this, the 44 days of conflict between Azerbaijan and Armenia, I mean, as a result of this war, according to this trilateral agreement between Russia, Azerbaijan, and Armenia, Armenia obliged to open the transport route between Nakhichevan Autonomous Republic of Azerbaijan through Armenia to Azerbaijan, connecting Nakhichevan with mainland Azerbaijan, and thus connecting Turkey with mainland Azerbaijan, Caspian Sea, and Central Asia. How would you see the perspectives of this development in the future, how this might affect Turkish Central Asian relations in the future? Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Well, this Zengezur corridor and the corridor from Nakhchivan connecting Azerbaijan is a very important thing. I mean, in Central Asia, you know better than me, the exclaves, enclaves, and these are the old Soviet inheritance. And Nakhchivan, Nagorno-Karabakh, they all kind of Soviet engineering of geography, politics, and creating, complicated potential problems. Well, it is very important. For many years, it's almost 30 years right now, Nakhchivan was only connected with Baku and Azerbaijan through air. In some situations, there is an Iranian corridor through Erdebil and I forgot the name of the pass over there. Well, I would remember, but mostly through air, or even I remember cases of some hardware, military hardware transported from Azerbaijan to Nakhchivan through Georgia, Turkey to Nakhchivan. Can you imagine? I mean, it's almost a circle they are doing. That creates lots of complexities. You're right, but I think yes, it's in the document. Creation of a corridor, but there are lots of potential problems, challenges for practicalities, because that kind of a corridor would seal Armenia from Iran. And Armenia and Iran has got very close relations, and Iran is one of the major suppliers to Armenia in many ways. It is a complicated project, and I don't see it's quickly realizable in that respect. But the thing is that definitely it would contribute to Turkey's connection, logistical connection with Central Asia. However, Georgia is a very reliable partner. And the railroad is completed last 2 years ago, and there are some corrections they are doing it, but just a month ago, a train departing from People's Republic of China passed through all Central Asia, through Caspian, and through Baku and Tbilisi, arrived to Erzurum and Turkey, and even passed through the Marmara, under the Marmara Sea with a new tunnel, and continued with this train to inner depths of the European continent. So the Iranian road is always problematic and not that much reliable, but I don't see a major logistical problem. But of course, at the beginning of the 90s, you remember, sir, there were lots of pipeline projects connecting Central Asia, especially Devlet Avad gas fields from Turkmenistan to European network, Trans-Caspian pipeline projects, etc. I think there is quite a long road for us to walk on that. But the thing is that Turkish Central Asian relations are in a great track. I mean, it has been 30 years right now. There have been problematic times, mostly caused by mutual misunderstandings, and also Turkey's, how to put it in a right wording, I really don't know, but Turkey had got some changing fluctuations, not only in its foreign policy, also in its aspirations. For example, it was difficult, and I lived through that, it was difficult to convince some people that, look, Turkey is not a big brother and cannot be a big brother in that respect. And nobody wants a big brother. I mean, it is 21st century is upcoming, and it's not the century of big brothers. And we are going into a polar world and multilateral politics and diplomacy time. But some people, you can't stop them. I mean, they feel they want to feel themselves good and great, and a kind of resurrecting Turkey as a great power, etc. So these kind of things and many other things created lots of problems. But I believe that just like little rivers are joining each other and creating a big river. All Turkish-speaking peoples, Turkish-speaking peoples are like that. I mean, there is a cultural background in that respect, very natural. I mean, that should not have a political agenda or any major international ambition, aspiration, but it's a very natural cultural, economic consequence of people who are speaking a similar language, living in a similar religion, same religion, and practicing a similar culture to cooperate, because there are lots of practicalities. I mean, the language is the major barrier in many respects, but also economics is very important. If Turkey economically performs better, definitely the relations and the interconnectedness, the logistics would be better. But I always believe that, although I'm not a political liberal, everything should be complementary to each other. I mean, one side should give something, the other side should give another thing. For example, with Russian Federation, we caught a very good climate ecosystem for many years in complementary economic relations. I mean, natural gas, pipelines, energy. Yes, we are very much interdependent on energy on Russia. Almost half of our energy comes from Russia. But tourism and Turkish exports to Russia are kind of balancing that. For example, we don't have that kind of a balancing interdependence with our relations with People's Republic of China, and that's one of the major topics of our economy bureaucrats.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
So,
Do you have any other questions? So then I would like to use my role as a moderator to ask you a question. So my question is maybe quite, to some extent, philosophical. Yeah, can we say that Turkey has a? Can you hear me, Professor?
yes, yes.
Can we say that the Turkish foreign policy has kind of ideology basis, or is it purely rational interest on the foundation of its foreign policy?
Well, a difficult question because it's quite theoretical. Yes and no, definitely. Just like any other foreign policy, it is rational. Well, the end decision made with a very good mechanism, which is a rational mechanism. But the thing is that it has got a spirit as well. I mean, post-Ottoman spirit, you can call it. Turkish nation-state spirit, but the most important spirit is in one word, survival, among Kalish, or survival. I mean, survival of Turkey. Survival of Turkey against separatist terrorism, survival or defending Turkish interests in Eastern Mediterranean, for example. Because, for example, Eastern Mediterranean is shared between Israel, Egypt, Syria, and Cypriot Greeks. But there's Cypriot Turks, and a good part of Eastern Mediterranean natural gas reserve belongs to Turkey. So why should we just ignore and close our eyes and in the name of friendship and brotherhood, give up our own rights? So that's very important. Again, survival in the Aegean, survival, for example, a recent Turkish-Libya sea line was drawn. We call Turkish territorial waters and continental shelf as the blue motherland. Because for many years it was ignored. So I think protecting national interests against any kind of adversaries is the major ideology of Turkish foreign policy. Rest of it, the global aspirations and all other, of course, these are kind of on the agenda, but still, I mean, they are not at the very core, at the center of Turkish foreign policy. They are important. For example, Turkish technical aid, TİKA, is one of the major technical aid apparatus organization all over the world. I mean, per capita Turkish technical aid to the countries of Asia, Africa, even in Europe is huge. And sometimes some Turkish citizens are quite not very happy with that, but still it is a major part of Turkish foreign policy, technical aid. And technical aid cannot be used as a kind of a bargaining tool for foreign policy ends. I wouldn't say it's an ideology, but I think it's a rational foreign policy based on defending Turkish interests in that respect.
Thanks a lot. So my colleague, Amos, has a question. He's a PhD candidate here at the university.
Yes.
Good afternoon, Mr. Karsar. Thank you for your speech. My question is about China. How you think China's role in Central Asia in terms of Belt and Road strategy, and maybe used, yeah, and maybe you say your mind about Turkey-China relations in Central Asia. Either the competitors or partners in Central Asia?
Yeah, good question. Well, in the global scale and in Central Asia, Turkey and China, Turkey and China definitely good trade partners, and it's increasing day by day. But Turkey is importing much more than exporting. But Turkey is importing for the purposes of what we call as re-export. So it's kind of we are buying from China plastics and some semi-processed goods, and we are processing them and exporting them. So that's kind of an interesting export-import relationship. Well, China is the #1 economy. China has developed OBOR projects not only because of interconnecting Central Asia or Europe from different parts of the world, but also China is having major problems in the Pacific and especially in South China Sea. So United States, together with Philippines and the nations of the South China Sea, is controlling South China Sea and controlling the naval traffic over the South China Sea. So China has got a strong navy right now, but far from controlling the global waters, the Pacific, Atlantic, or international navigable straits, etc. So that's why China developed this huge project, OBOR. For example, a student of mine has written a thesis about Gwadar port in Pakistan, and all kind of details of posts and Chinese military technical assistance to the very end of Pakistan, interconnected with China, is a huge project, spent huge money, but China is becoming a little bit staying short in political support, and also kind of still needs some improvement in that respect. It's a huge and ambitious project, but the thing is that interconnecting China, Central Asia, or Asia from south to north, from east to west, is always good. I mean, from the Turkish perspective, this interconnection, any kind of connection, works both sides. So it cannot be only China's massive accumulation of goods and services and economic power to the countries of Central Asia or to the west, to Caucasus and Turkey, but there would be another thing. And actually, if we follow the Chinese press and press releases, China has got important kind of problems with Turkish speaking and its own Muslims. So it's kind of a security aspect for China as well, to have some peaceful borders and neighbors surrounding Chinese territories. Some people think that OBOR is kind of a new kind of Sino-imperialism project, etc. No, I don't believe. I think it always contributes bilateral and multilateral relations on all sides. And Turkey and China, your question, I think Turkey and China are not compatible or comparable in their sizes. I mean, Turkey is much smaller in economic sense, and also, well, Turkey doesn't have that much money to invest into international projects. However, if your question is like that, does Turkey perceive China as a potential threat? No, I don't think so, because Turkey considers China as a new balancing actor in the international arena. If it is gonna be, and it's already a multipolar world, China is one of the balancing actors. The important thing is to stop the Chinese aspirations, and I'm sure, I mean, they have a very complicated and long-standing state culture in that respect, to expand territories. But Chinese border problems in Kashmir, in Taiwan, are very limited, in Ussurisk with Russia, are very limited. I hope in the future there won't be new aspirations.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
One more question from our doctoral students, from Maulida, please.
Good afternoon, dear professor. Thank you very much for your interesting lecture. I want to know your opinion about Turkey's role as a mediator in regional or international conflicts. I've heard that Turkey Turkey offers mediator services in many conflicts. What is the purpose of this mediator role for Turkey?
Very good question. That's one of the major debates we have in Turkey as well. Should we assume the role of a mediator or not? Are we Norwegian, Swiss, or sometimes Spanish? Definitely we are not. The thing is that in most of the conflicts, if not the Turkish state, Turkish people has got kind of taking a side. So, for example, like 10, 15 years ago, I think, Turkey offered mediation between Palestinians and Israelis. At that time, we had very close relations with Israel. But at that time, I didn't find it quite practical. It's very difficult. I mean, United States spent decades, Dayton, etc., all kind of, initiatives. These are very difficult. And we know mediation talks, for example, through Cyprus. The Cyprus problem had more than 100 rounds of mediation rounds for many years, in many decades. So I think like 5-6 years ago, Turkey found the right track. We do it through informal platforms. So if you go to Istanbul, in most of the good hotels, you see lots of conferences of Libyan parties, conferences of Syrian oppositions, conferences of, I don't know, Yemeni groups, etc. So they are not done through the official mechanisms or through official binding mediation efforts, just like some Nordic countries, ministries of foreign affairs are assuming the role. They are done through kind of civilian, let's say, official platforms. I think that's the best thing we can do. I mean, giving them a chance to talk to each other. There are lots of, for example, Geneva talks, Astana process about Syria, and Turkey is a part of it, but not major initiator of all kind of mediation efforts in that respect. Because, as I told you, the size and the limitations of Turkey is not, for example, in order to be a good mediator country between conflicting parties, you should be either completely objective, not related with them, with the conflict at all, or a very small nation doesn't have any kind of, international presence or conflicts, etc. So it's good for the Nordic nations, but not for Turkey. Okay, I'm asking for my email. I'm writing it in the chat box. Okay.
Yeah, we can. You have shared your email, Sadiq?
Yes, someone was asking my email over there, Sharipo.
Ah, okay, okay.
Okay.
I will share with them.
Okay. Okay.
So if we are not kind of abusing your time, I have one last question.
Please go ahead.
So the question is kind of related to the previous one. So what are the main tools of Turkish soft power? So in contemporary situation, one of them probably in Central Asia, I can say, especially in Uzbekistan, Turkish movies and dramas are extremely popular. Can we say is this the kind of part of soft power Turkish cinema, or it's just kind of a simple thing that we should not relate to soft power tool?
Well, I think the Turkish TV serials, cinema, these cannot be considered as tools because they are not engineered. I mean, they are the natural products, especially most of them are produced for consumption for the domestic public in Turkey. And they are quite popular in Middle East, sometimes in Central Asia, in Latin America, for example. I talked to some tourists coming from Brazil and Chile, and they tell me things about Turkish dramas and TV series, and I have no knowledge of them at all. But most of them are produced for local consumption, and sometimes they are distributed internationally as well. But there are some. So I don't consider them as tools, but there are some tools like TİKA, Turkish Foreign Aid Agency, like Yunus Emre Association. It's the British Council's Turkish version. So, teaching Turkish all over the world, Turkish movies, Turkish theaters, etc., Turkish culture. Yurt dışı Türkler, Turks living abroad, it's a big Study Turkey program, distributing tens of thousands of scholarships, for undergrad studies, for graduate studies, etc., throughout the world. I think every year something like 3,000-5,000 students are coming through this channel, but there's a huge kind of student diaspora. So this is an engineered, a state-sponsored tool. Ministry of Culture and Tourism has got some different programs, etc. Turkish state television has got some specially engineered channels. Turkish, for example, TRT Arabi, TRT Kurdi, TRT International, TRT Eurasia, that kind of things. I think soft power is a big debate, so I'm not going to go into that. But you can do everything to engineer it, to create lots of tools, but I think it should be a natural process. So it should be a natural outcome of your economic power, your societal and political development. Otherwise, it would stay as an artificial attempt to increase your leverage in the international affairs.
Many thanks, Professor Kasa. I think we're not going to further abuse your time, and I mostly asked you 1 hour, and now we have already in the meeting 1 hour and 15 minutes. So many thanks for your very interesting, insightful, and I think I can even say thought-provoking kind of meeting and sharing your views. I think we have gained a lot of new knowledge and new analysis on the current priorities of Turkish foreign policy, and what is even more important, what are the kind of historical background of the current developments of Turkish foreign policy. And I think we are very, very glad to see the current achievements in Turkish foreign policy. It's quite active engagement with Central Asia. And I hope this is kind of our starting point of our cooperation. And I hope we can host you someday in person. And hopefully this pandemic is gradually easing and we will have chance to travel. So thanks a lot for this meeting. And I would like to give the floor to Professor Ismail for a couple of final remarks.
Thank you.
Thank you, Professor, for your time. Thank you for sharing your views. It was very interesting, was very comprehensive. Thank you so much. And I say that welcome to Uzbekistan, welcome to Tashkent, to University of World Economy and Diplomacy. We're really happy to see you here. So take care and see you soon.
Thank you. We would like to see you here as well. Come and visit us at Cappadocia. It's beautiful.
Thanks a
Thank
lot.
you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Greetings to our graduate as well.
Hope to see you soon. Goodbye. Thank you.
To'xtatib kelamiz.
Zavishet chiqsa avtomatik saqlanib bo'lish kerak.
Давай, нажимай. Нажимай.